Welcome everyone to today's edition of NFT Tuesdays, where we chat all things non-fungible tokens. Today's topic will be buying NFTs, bullish or bearish. I'll be one of your hosts today, Brenton Nika from the Binance Africa team, and with me is my esteemed colleague, Chidabim. So don't forget, we have an amazing session lined up for you. And if you spread the love across social media, use the hashtag NFT Tuesdays. So Chidabim, what do we have lined up for all of our guests today?
So today we'll be joined by amazing guests, some of which have made insane headlines in the past month, some as recent as today. So today we have a fireside chat with Tubedo of Metapause, and we'll also be having a panel discussion with Yatsui of Animoca Brands, Nick of Refinable, and our very own Gelp of Binance. So Brenton, before we go ahead, Brenton will be giving us some good news.
That's right, Chidabim. So if you take a look at the screen right now, you will see our lucky winners from last week. So if you see your email on screen right now, or part thereof, congratulations, you are one of last week's lucky winners. But if you don't see your email there, don't despair, because we have an absolutely amazing prize up for grabs today. Chidabim, what is that?
So today we'll be giving away, personally, one of the coolest giveaways I have seen ever. We'll be giving away a Canva digital art canvas. So essentially, this is a beautiful way to display your digital art at home. How cool is that? So to win, the rules are simple. First, you must be registered for today's event. If you're not registered, you use this QR code here to register. So after the event, we'll send a short quiz through Eventbrite. And then if you answer correctly, you stand a chance to win. So if I were you, I'll be paying attention very closely. Brenton, take it away.
Like Chidabim said, make sure you pay attention. And the first segment we have for you today is a fireside chat with Tubedo from Metapause, as well as Leah Callan-Butler. Over to you, team.
Hey everybody, thanks for having us tonight, and amazing to meet you, Tubedo. Thanks for being here.
Likewise, LCB. It's a pleasure. I love your work. I've read a lot of your articles, and the two you mentioned are by far my favorite in the space, because I think they describe two very seminal events in the NFT journey. So great to meet you.
I have to admit, I am totally taken aback. I didn't expect you to say that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you, because I know that we both share a massive passion for storytelling. And, you know, that's why I was kind of excited to speak with you, because I do believe as well that it is so important to uncover the stories behind NFTs to kind of understand this movement, where it's going, where its potential, where its real utility is. So thank you for checking out my stories. I guess anyone who hasn't met me before, because you're probably more likely to have heard of Tubedo than me, I'm the director of Emphasis Consulting, and I write a column for CoinDesk. But last year, I think perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, Tubedo, but I think probably one of the stories that you're referring to was from within the Philippines, where some Filipino players were playing NFT games in order to put food on the table during the pandemic when they'd lost jobs. And this story really captured my imagination, because, you know, I think a lot of people still wonder, what is the real use case for crypto? You know, is blockchain a technology crying out for a solution that nobody really asked for? And perhaps that criticism has actually been fairly valid for a lot of use cases over past years. But now we're seeing this incredible utility come into NFTs. I mean, I wanted to start off, and I'm sure we'll have some amazing questions from the audience too. So please pop your questions in the little chat box and I'll look out for them. But Tubedo, I know that stories are really important to you, and that you find value in the stories behind an NFT. you know, can you talk a little bit about what that actually means to you, and what are some of the best stories that you've heard behind NFTs? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Well, let's look at it this way. I think stories actually add value. I mean, when you think about what gives these unique digital assets value, you can trace this back to the grandfather of them all, Bitcoin, right? What gives Bitcoin its value? It's not its technical composition alone. It's not the scarcity alone. It's that origin story, that myth of its origin story, right? Think about this. I mean, when you're writing, say, you're opening a documentary about Bitcoin, and you say something like, from the ashes of the financial ruin of 2008 emerged this new alternative, which was created by this pseudonymous entity called Satoshi Nakamoto. He created this entity, and he walked away into the sunset, neither claiming credit for it nor taking any of the upsides. Now that's a killer origin story, right? And that's where the value comes from, really. And that holds true for all of the digital assets that have sort of followed Bitcoin. And that's kind of what drew me down the rabbit hole as well. I mean, my own story in this space, if you trace it, I've been aware of Bitcoin since 2013, the crypto space, but it did nothing to me. The same packet of information, which was enough to put a left-brain person like Metakovan, sort of give him wings and become what he is today, left me completely unaffected for years on end. I found my groove only in the NFT space because I was finally able to imagine all of these abstract concepts of inalienable ownership, or this financial independence, suddenly vividly and in color. That's what NFTs do for you, and that's why I think stories that back these NFTs are the real value that they bring.
Yeah, I have to say I uncovered a story fairly recently when I first met Yatsu, who will be joining us later, which I have to say is probably one of the best stories in NFTs I've ever heard, about the 111 car from F1 Delta Time. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, this car caused huge controversy. And I think it's really relevant to your story as well, Tubador, because most people have probably come across Metapurse this year because of the $69 million Beeple sale. But you guys have been breaking records for a long time. And it's a really long time if you think about the background of NFTs as well. But the biggest NFT sale in 2019 was, I think, just... At current prices, it was just over, at prices back then, it was just over $100,000, which was huge. But it was this amazing car in F1 Delta Time, the 111, and a pseudonymous buyer had purchased it. No one knew who it was. And it really caused a massive uproar because people actually accused Animoca brands of it being a huge marketing stunt. They said,
we did cause them a lot of heartburn, yes.
Yeah, because they were like, well, who would ever spend that much money on an NFT? Obviously you guys have manufactured this. And it wasn't until I think maybe 18 months later that the buyer was revealed. Do you want to tell a little bit about, from your perspective, how that happened and why Metapurse actually decided to come forward?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting, right? The very title of this discussion is, buying NFTs, is it bullish or bearish? It's a bit of both, isn't it? It's bearish when you're not entirely sure what you want to do with those NFTs. It's bullish when you have a certain conviction. And that happens in these rare moments, right? It was actually a no-brainer thinking about it. And this is all Metakovan, by the way. I wasn't even inside the NFT space when the Delta Time 111 thing happened. After he bought the car, he told me. I didn't really get it then, but then the trick is this, right? If you had a chance to buy the first ever Model T Ford, how much would you pay for it? It's very hard to put a number to that sort of a thing. And Metacovan's the kind of guy who was able to fall in love with the concept of virtual land when it was just red dots on a screen, before it was all of this high fidelity world. So the reason we kept mum is that we didn't have a thesis on what we wanted to do with these NFTs. We knew they were important. We felt it in our gut. And we knew that they would take some form or some shape very soon, but we didn't know what it was. But in 2020, obviously, once the pandemic hit and the world started to look inward into the metaverse and realize that NFTs were a thing and started to build all of these wonderful projects, it started to make sense. We also began to realize what we wanted to do with these NFTs, and by then we'd had a couple of conversations with Yat. Massive admiration for that person and what he's accomplished in this space. It just felt right.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more from Yat later, because his personal story is pretty incredible as well. Yeah. But I just want to ask you a little bit more about that, if you don't mind. Sure. I really appreciate the fact that you admitted that you didn't quite get it at the time, and you think, why are you spending so much money on this virtual car? When did you start to come around and change your idea on NFTs? And also, when you're looking to purchase one, what other kind of factors do you evaluate beyond the story behind it?
Interesting, right? I never questioned why he'd spend that amount of money on a virtual car. I mean, that part, it sort of made sense to me. And before even we got into the car part of it, virtual land made a lot of sense, because from where I come from, and this wave of authoritarianism that's now sweeping the world, the concept of ownership is very tenuous, shall I say. It's not as definite as it is in the blockchain space as we experience it. So the idea of being able to own something, a plot of virtual land on which you can build something and sort of plant your identity in, was very close to us. It sort of spoke to us. I started to get into it really only when I started to speak with the creators, with artists. That was my aha moment. The artists were my key, into this entire space. It unlocked a lot of stuff for me. And it's pretty simple and pretty profound in a sense, because we've all experienced art, right? We do so on a daily basis, but it's very subconscious. It's behind us somewhere. And when we want to engage with it, we find that it's locked up in an ivory tower with access only to people with means, right? You don't feel like you're worthy enough to be able to engage with art. That completely changed over the last 8 or 9 months, in which I'd known pre-COVID maybe a handful of artists in my life personally, out of whom maybe 2 of them were actually making money doing art. And all of a sudden, I now have deep and very important relationships with over 100 artists, 150 artists. And that completely changed my mental models and my own sense of self-worth, if I may say so. It's very true. And that's what sort of plunged me into NFTs and to start to really engage with not just the stories, but also the value that NFTs bring. I heard somebody mention the utility of NFTs, and I think that's extremely important. This Cambrian explosion that we're seeing right now is all about acquisition. But then at some point, it's going to wane a little bit, and people are going to start asking this question really seriously. What do we do with our NFTs? And the projects and the spaces that most effectively answer that question are going to carry this forward into the next wave. And when I try to choose an NFT to buy, this is a question I ask myself. I love this NFT. I love the story behind it, the idea behind it. What's the narrative that's going to keep this relevant for the next 50 years? That's my mental model when I look at NFTs to purchase.
I keep hearing that actually from people talking about how they value NFTs. And one of the things I love about it is that it almost feels like there's a bit of an irrational aspect, that as humans, we feel this really emotional attachment to our things. And I think that idea has really been interrogated recently. Like, we saw Jimmy's song was coming out saying NFTs are bribes by the Ethereum network, and all these sorts of criticisms of the value of NFTs. And I guess, and this comes out, I think, too, when we chat with Yat, too, sort of around how do you express yourself and tell your personal stories. But do you think that that's true, that we do have this, emotional element with our stuff, with our things, with the things that we buy to, tell stories about who we are as people and express ourselves in the real world? NFTs are kind of bringing that ability to do that in the metaverse and in virtual worlds. And I guess the prevailing idea from anyone outside the space right now is that digital stuff doesn't have value. It comes from this place of abundance. Well, I could just copy and paste an NFT. Why would I ever pay for one? How do you see that changing? And when are people really going to have that huge mindset shift where they start to truly value things in the virtual world? So, they would absolutely want to have that certificate of authenticity to show that it is theirs so they can prove it.
The later that happens, the better for me. The more for all of us take. So I have no qualms with people not getting it yet. That's fine. You can take your time. I'm not here trying to trying to preach to you or bring you over to the dark side. It's fine. You're happy there. I'm perfectly happy with my bunch of NFTs. But seriously, I mean, you're so right in pointing out that we have uh, this really almost romantic sort of attachment to these NFTs, right? Look at the story of Dylan Fields and the Alien Punk, right? Which sold for $7.5 million. It wasn't an easy decision. It was hard. He sort of twisted himself in knots thinking about it, what he felt about that piece, what it meant to him, and should he really pass it on? And what's the value of, an NFT of that significance changing hands and so on. So there is a whole narrative behind it. And at a more pragmatic level, it hurts you more when you lose an NFT than when you lose a bunch of tokens in your wallet. I've seen this happen with a lot of my friends, and that is true. And that's where the key is, right? I mean, the one thing that NFTs do, which can't be taken away from us, is that it forces you to engage with the culture. And that's what makes this whole NFT movement the renaissance, as I call it, because it's the convergence of tech, of finance, and of culture. And the vehicle here, the primary vehicle that's driving all of this forward, is the culture. From now on, any innovation in crypto becomes sort of bundled or subsumed under the NFT phenomenon. Everything else is under the hood. The vehicle that you see in front of you is going to be NFTs from now on. That's how I look at it. And examples like the Dylan Field and the CryptoPunks thing, and how we look at NFTs itself is kind of speaks to this particular theory. It forces finance to come out of its comfort zone and to engage with culture. You can't number crunch your way through understanding NFTs. You have to get in and do the work. You have to speak to the people. You have to read LCB articles. You have to, sort of engage with the community. And that's how you get to understand this space. There are no shortcuts. There are no spreadsheets that you can look at and say, okay, I now understand NFTs and I know where to invest in.
Yeah, I get this sense that with NFTs, they to their owners and to their creators, they are much, much more than just a price tag, and it's almost offensive to reduce them to a price because there's just so much more that impacts their value. I guess on that, I mean, everyone has got into NFTs in the last few months. I was working on a project back in sort of December, January, and made this, it was on NFTs in the Philippines, and we made a really conscious decision not to use the word NFT in it because we wanted to invite a really general audience, and we thought no one's going to know what an NFT is. And then by March, the whole world had just melted down over NFTs. Okay. Everyone knew what an NFT was. But, you guys have been in this space for a really, really long time. So I was wondering, you were just talking about the utility of NFTs and where we're seeing, different blockchain technologies collide, like where NFTs make DeFi and so on. Where are you seeing this space go? Like, what do you think will be the next trends in terms of how people are using and applying NFTs?
Interesting, right? I mean, one of the best models, the most obvious ones, is what's happening with Animoca brands, right? With the Delta Time 111 brand, NFTs start to become cash flow tokens. There's real utility in how they're used in the entire gaming ecosystem. They start to generate revenue back for you. What you acquired now starts to pay off. And that's a very elegant model. That's a very intelligent way to monetize NFTs, rather than trying to unimaginatively simply flip it for a higher price someplace. That's one kind of an example. The other, of course, is the concept of fractionalized ownership, which again is starting to get really popular. We might have been guilty in sort of pushing it forward in a direction with our B20 project. Then there's projects like Uniquely, for instance, which are doing interesting things. Grow Your Base sort of pioneered the concept of fractionalized ownership around bundles. So that's one direction. I think gaming worlds will sort of drive this forward. In a sense, they'll start to make sense once the games become operational and become high fidelity games. And I suppose the final layer is going to be interoperability. And this is where it gets really fascinating, right? In one of the recent Clubhouse conversations with A16Z, Andreessen. He said maybe it's time for standardization was a topic. Do we need standardization in NFTs? And I believe that the answer is no. You don't need to standardize NFTs in this space, because the beauty of it is that you can have a single NFT represented in different ways in different worlds. Think about it, right? At the end of the day, it's a digital pointer. The NFT in your hand, the sword in a game, for instance, can have a different look and a different functionality or a feel in crypto voxels, in Sandbox, in Somnium space, and in Decentraland, for so on. So that, I think, will be the ultimate stage to where we can take this. That will be the true metaverse coming alive, in a sense.
Yeah, interoperability really does feel like the final frontier for me. Like we were just sort of having a discussion about in the real world, if you own your things, obviously you can do whatever you want with them. And to me, you know, if I was going to go to, say, a shopping center in the metaverse and buy a pair of Nike shoes, and I would want to wear them to go and see my friends in Axie Infinity and in the Sandbox and so on. So I think it'll be really interesting when we do start to see those assets being cross-chain interoperable as well. We've got a question here. So someone from the audience, so they're asking, how can we be sure that the type of NFTs we see now will be the same as NFTs that we see in 20 years' time? Do you think NFTs today are going to end up technologically outdated?
I hope they're not the same. I hope they evolve. And that's the beauty of it, right? An NFT at the end of the day is not the exact asset that you see in front of you. It represents ownership to that. So there is a lot of room for evolution. You can, for starters, start to add metadata, and on top of it, the asset that the NFT is supposed to represent can evolve, can grow, and you can still own it. And 20 years later, you might be the owner of something spectacular that you can't even imagine today or in 6 months' time.
Yeah, I think so. We had a second question too, which was very similar about the future of NFTs. We were just talking about utility, and I wanted to ask if you've seen many more examples of things like, so we mentioned fractionalization, but what about renting and loaning NFTs, and also using them as collateral for a loan? Like I was just thinking before when we were talking about items in the real world that we really love, I guess, you know, an example we see here in the Philippines a lot is that the pawn shop network is very well established. And sometimes if someone needs a loan, they might go and pawn an item like, say, an engagement ring or something really special for them in order to get some liquidity in terms of a loan when they really need it. And now we're seeing people do that with NFTs. I mean, what sort of things are you seeing there in terms of the future application of NFTs for finance?
You know, I think leasing is long overdue. You know, the most obvious use cases are virtual estate, right? Real estate on crypto voxels or elsewhere. And there have been very active, you know, discussions, conversations around this. For instance, the crypto voxels community really wants Ben to start or, you know, leasing of these land parcels as a viable means to generate income instead of minting more lands. That's a given. That's a natural, and that's already happening at some level with a lot of these gaming items. And I'd love to see more of that. And obviously, using NFTs as collateral is now a no-brainer. We're just waiting for even better models around liquidity. It's too simplistic, and liquidation mechanisms are still very hard. In a sense, the simplest one is if you're not able to pay back the loan, you get to keep the NFT. That's nice. That's a sweet deal for whoever lent you, but you need to have maybe a little bit more sophistication in this. And that's something I'd love to see going forward.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like the early days of the internet, I guess, where it was very difficult for people to understand where this would take us. You know, even a lot of the products in DeFi are very reflective of what can be accessed in traditional financial services now. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that gets pulled apart and put back together and creating totally new products and services. I think we're nearly coming up to time, and we might be moving over to our panel discussion shortly.
Okay.
This has been amazing, by the way. I'm kind of fangirling at the moment, so thank you.
Nice. Yeah, this is fun.
Looks like we might actually have a little bit more time. I guess one more question from me.
Sure.
You know, I think you've kind of already answered this, but again, coming back to the theme, bullish or bearish, do you think we're still really early for NFTs? Or because some people are going, oh, maybe I missed the boat.
Definitely early, definitely early. And that's not just NFTs, but the crypto space as a whole, right? That's the whole message. That's the whole theory or the metaphor that MetaCoven and I and the metaverse thing represents. And even that Beeple picture, the $69 million picture, the idea of it is that you can start from anywhere. I mean, trace that picture in the top left. The first image is really crap, right? It's really, really basic. But then you trace that journey, you trace the journey of an artist, you trace the journey of a person who's had this almost spiritual amount of commitment to that one thing he does day in and day out, on his sick days, on his healthy days. I mean, he put forward a work of art in 15 minutes the day his wife went into labor. He didn't even miss that day. So the theory is you can start anywhere, but if you have this kind of this focus, a sort of a discipline in what you're trying to pursue, you are going to get to the end of the rainbow, whether it's at the end of 6 months or a year or 13. And with crypto, you can start today and still do what MetaCoven did. The possibility is very real.
Yeah, and that really opens up incredible financial possibilities too. You know, I'm sure I read somewhere, is it true that when Beeple was starting 5,000 days, MetaCoven didn't have enough money to buy a new laptop?
Yes.
Is that? Yeah.
He had he used to walk around with a pen drive, and he used to plug it into his friends' laptops and practice coding. And more than a few times, I think he crashed his friends' laptops trying to learn to code. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, that really is incredible, this transformative potential. I think we're seeing it here in the Philippines too, with things like NFT games providing people access to the kind of money and funding that just never would have been possible within their own space. And having access to that kind of global capital, but also opportunity, is really, truly life-changing. So I just love stories like that. We need more role models like you and MetaCoven in the world.
We need more storytellers like you. So yeah, more power to you, Leah.
Well, you know, you guys make it easy because, you know, there is just so many stories coming out right now. And I'm just glad that we get the opportunity to have nights like this as well, to be able to go through these sorts of things that are happening, because it really does make the imagination run wild. I'll hand back to Brenton and Chubidum, and I think we're going to move over to a panel discussion after that. Thank you so much, Chubidor.
This was a pleasure. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Tubador. I think something that actually struck me is the way he said how finance interacts with culture now. I think that has been incredible to watch, even in terms of the art, the games, just the way the different industries are interacting. And I actually do believe we're in really early times. You're right, I do believe so. So without further ado, I'll be handing back to Leah. But before that, please ensure you're using the hashtag NFT Tuesdays. Sending your questions, sending your comments. We'll love to hear from you. So Leah, back to you with the panel discussion with Nick, with Yat, and with Gleb.
Hi, everybody. I'm on a high because we just had like an amazing chat with Chubidor. That was so cool. But thank you guys for joining me. It sounds like Nick, you're on a high as well because you just had your token launch today. Do you want to give us a quick update?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me on. It was I think Chubidor gave some really good points over there. But yeah, so today was also our token generation event. So I just came off basically 4 or 5 hours with the team to manage the entire process, and it has been a tremendous, tremendous support from the community. I think it did a lot better than we could have ever imagined. So I think it gives us a lot of validation in terms of sort of what we're looking to do with Refinable, sort of promoting the different level use cases for NFTs. And today I think we broke a couple of records. I think we also created a huge congestion on BSC. So apologies to everyone over there if you couldn't push out any BSC transactions. But I'm sure it's something that we're definitely gonna prevent in the future. So that's been super exciting for us.
Yeah, it's a bit of a theme. We've got record breakers all over the place tonight. That's great. I'd love to dig straight into our conversation just around, some of these themes that we were talking about before in terms of, what does it actually mean to own an NFT? What does utility look like in the future? That sounds like it's going to be a popular question. But if you don't mind, I'd love to throw to Yat first. Great to see you again, Yat. We have had some super interesting conversations just recently around these kinds of themes, and your name did pop up a few times when we were talking to Tubador. Sounds like he's a fan of yours too. But I just wanted to start off with, I guess, the basic question around digital property rights. And I know you like to talk about the open digital assets framework. If we just go right back to the beginning, I think some people outside the space still have trouble understanding, what is the value of digital property rights? Why would I even want to really own something on the internet? Why do you think people really struggle with that yet?
Well, first, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and very honored about sort of all the comments, especially sort of, Tubador and Minikoven, and the great company to be in here, everyone sort of pioneering their way forward. This is part of why we love the NFT space, because everyone in the NFTs, they're just builders, right? And they're long-term as well. I think that's the other thing. Partially why it's somewhat misunderstood, I think, is because we live in sort of the crypto world, and we started off with the fungible tokens. So the whole narrative started off that way. So people are looking more at the speed of liquidity, not necessarily at the long-term value that's being built. But now, what is long-term value, and why is NFT so important? NFTs, one of the things I think to understand about NFTs is that really it is a store of culture, right? And I think we often think about sort of crypto everything around the store of value, and there's value in culture, but there's so much more than just the value. And what makes it valuable is because there's emotions and feelings and memories and all these things that sort of make our own personal lives valuable, right? Like your wedding ring is valuable, for instance, or your first shoes are valuable, or your first memories with your children are valuable, but there's no price tag to it that you can necessarily put. They're priceless, right? And that is actually what NFTs represent. A digital property right is therefore a way in which, through NFTs, these property rights become permanent. Maybe, again, only important to you, or maybe a community of 10 or 20 or 30, or your family, right? It doesn't have to be worth something to millions, right? That's not necessarily what it is. I think 99% of all the NFTs that are going to be out there are going to be valuable only to small communities, but they're actually going to be valuable in immeasurable ways. And that's what's so powerful, because when you play games, when you're in the metaverse, we're building memories already, except we don't own those memories, if you think about it, right? They're actually captured by the platform. And with NFTs, we now own that. And what's beautiful about this is that you can build on top of these memories, as we do in real life, right? And then we can sort of derive different kinds of sentimental value, not necessarily just dollar value. And again, I think we struggle with this because we think, well, it's digital, it's kind of ethereal, it's kind of something that we can't really touch and feel. But what is love, right? What are feelings? Anyway, right?
Wow, we're going really deep. I love this. I mean, you've got some really interesting rhetoric too around who gets this concept and why. And I think, you've also pointed out that perhaps gaming and NFT gaming could be the best pathway to adoption, because gamers really kind of understand that emotional connection that you might have with, say, an exosuit or a skin within inside a game, because it is really a part of you. It's more than just a digital item. But I guess too, I like the stories that you tell, because, talking about the importance of backstories. Could you just tell us really briefly, hope you don't mind, guys, just about your experience of being deplatformed back in 2012? Yeah, because, I feel like people bang on all the time about the importance of decentralization and the importance of true digital rights. But your story, when people understand it, I think it really opens your mind. People start thinking, wow, it's not just important, it is essential that we own our things on the internet. So maybe you could just give us a really quick nutshell story in terms of what happened to you.
So in 2000, so in 2010 to 2011, we actually became one of the biggest mobile game companies in the world. With hit titles like Stargirl and Pretty Pet Salon. We actually had 12 out of the top 20 apps on the App Store. And the sort of quick story is that Apple didn't like what we did because they thought we spammed the App Store. And instead of sort of giving us a call and saying, hey, guys, we have some issues with this. Can you maybe change your sort of cross-promotion mechanisms or whatever? They just took away all of our apps. At that point, we had like hundreds of apps on the App Store and just completely sort of removed everything. And at the time, Apple also didn't have an office in Hong Kong or in Asia, really, for the App Store. So it was all done out of Cupertino, and that was it. And we came back 2 years later and sort of clawed our way back a little bit into some position in the mobile game space. But ultimately, weren't able to sort of go back to where we were, one of the sort of biggest companies in that space. And I think this happens, by the way, all the time, right? I mean, this is just a personal sort of experience we had as a company. In a way, almost killed us. But it happens on people building on Twitter. It happens on people building on Facebook. It happens all the time because we don't actually own any of that that's on there. The platform gives you permission, and if you don't have the permission, you're kind of screwed, right? I think the thing about NFTs is that the center of the experience now is centered around your ownership of these assets. And this is the part that really sort of decentralizes not just the whole thing about the blockchain and sort of decentralized ecosystems, but the ownership of the assets means that you can actually have a relationship now with the owner of the asset and build businesses around it. And this is what's powerful here, because if you think about even our relationship with assets in the physical world, like for instance, the sale of a car. The sale of the car is but a small portion of the actual industry of automobiles. When you think about the building of roads, or the sort of the fuel, the hiring of drivers, sort of the people who paint the cars, the mechanics that you hire, right? These are actually all people that are employed in a permissionless fashion. I don't have to go to Tesla to be a mechanic for a Tesla car. I don't have to get permission from Tesla to paint a Tesla car or car accessories or any of that kind of stuff. And so actually what happens is NFTs that are open digital assets, we really believe that NFTs are going to do to digital assets what open source did to code, which basically means that there's going to be a massive, incredible creative revolution that we're just really in the beginning of, and people create new composable things on it and new services on top of it that we're just beginning to see, like with loans, but it's really just scratching the surface. And the one thing I'll say in closing on this is that open source was really the one big promise that succeeded to come out of Web 1 and Web 2 that sort of became open, but only a small portion benefited, which are the people who know how to code, right? And so it's a language that is still only limited to a small percentage of the world today. As much as we have tried to teach all children to code, we haven't gotten there yet, right? But our relationship with culture, our relationship with assets is different. It's one that's accessible to everyone. And so I think of NFTs as something that can really, really deliver a global, open sort of ownership revolution in a way that open source could not because it wasn't able to, but it was simply not as accessible.
Thank you. Yeah, I love chatting to you, because I always kind of feel like it's a bit like looking into a crystal ball. You have this amazing ability to just kind of look into the future and think about how this tech will be used. But your story too about being deplatformed, it's almost like the beginnings of a horror movie in the future when we're actually living more and more of our lives online, and this awful idea that you wake up one day and someone has just like wiped your entire life out of existence. I mean, when you start to think about it, that's pretty horrifying. And perhaps NFTs are the building blocks of, a future that we can actually create and own ourselves, which is pretty cool. Gleb, I want to throw over to you. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hey.
So are you in Russia?
Yeah, I'm based in Russia, and I'm responsible for Binance development in Eastern Europe.
Wow. So tell us about, how you found out about NFTs and all of this discussion that we're talking about. What is it like over there in terms of how people are thinking about the potential and application of NFTs?
I think first time when I heard about NFTs, it was 2017 or something like that. CryptoPunks and kitties. So these were first projects in NFT space. But what I think that there were a lot of buzz in media about those projects. But when the hype was over, I think crypto enthusiasts lost interest to those projects. But what's really interesting about NFTs is that right now we see that there is some infrastructure around NFTs, because 2 years ago there were no good marketplaces, and right now we have a lot of different marketplaces that projects and celebrities, artists, they can use it, and they can issue NFT just into clicks. But 2 years ago we didn't have it. So to be honest, I'm really bullish on NFT. And in Russia today, we finished our hackathon on DeFi and NFT, and we received a great number of applications from different projects. Around 50 projects applied for our hackathon. And actually, we see that a lot of teams right now are trying to build some really cool cool projects in NFT space. So what I think the next trend, I think it's about fractionalization and putting some inner value into NFTs. So for example, you can build some cool mechanics and economics around NFTs. So you can take, for example, Bitcoin or Ethereum and put it into NFT. So you can split NFT in different fractions. So actually, there are a lot of things that you can do with NFTs. And I think, right now it's just the beginning.
Wow, I would have liked to be a fly on the wall at that hackathon, seeing what was coming out of there. Are you seeing any sort of particular applications that you think are specific to your part of the world that, that people elsewhere might not have thought about yet?
I think, the trend is pretty much similar to other countries. In terms
Similar
of
to metaverse.
So in terms of NFTs, artists, celebrities in Russia, they also try to build some, they also try to, issue own NFTs and sell them. So actually, in my part of the world, there is big hype about that as well.
Interesting. And Nick, so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think you've got some very specific ideas too around how brands, for example, might be able to leverage this, and, where NFTs are going in the future. Maybe you could give us just a little recap about the problem that Refinable solves, and, where you think this is going in terms of utility.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, so Refinable is basically a NFT marketplace, and we're basically one of the first major NFT marketplace being built on Binance Smart Chain. So we're very happy that we're building out the community over there. And so on a very high level, what we're trying to do is that we want to create an accessible ecosystem so that people can come in and engage with the NFT experience. So, what that actually means is that we kind of want, we believe in the future potential of NFTs, and we really want people to go and create these different use cases for NFTs. I think in a lot of cases, digital art, gaming are sort of the lowest hanging fruit. I think those make a lot of sense as well. But I think right now, if people were to even go in to create and think about different ways that NFT can be used for community engagement, it's very prohibitive for them to do it on Ethereum, just because you're forced to pay hundreds of dollars in transaction fees. So we see this as an immediate issue, and we want to have an immediate solution to provide for this. And so the way that we do want to pitch sort of these different higher level NFT use cases is sort of thinking about NFTs as a new social media vertical. So I think Yacht had some beautiful rhetoric. It's almost poetic about how the NFT valuations are really coming together. So I always tell people NFTs are very interesting because you can't really price them that well. It takes a community of people to really give it meaning, to give it value. And so at the end of the day, Refinable is an NFT marketplace, but we're really trying to support different communities. And we think, the best part about working with brands is that all these brands are bringing in fan bases, different viewership, that these are all different types of communities that we can support. And NFTs are fantastic because they're very community centric. And so if you think about different community engagement metrics, you can have items that are sort of, they don't even have to have a high monetary value attached to it. There are different ways that you engage sort of say, for example, McDonald's with your stamp cards that, different seasonal collectibles. If you collect 10 of them, you can redeem it for a different prize. Maybe you can have different TV shows or different musicians that can sell not just their music, but perhaps 60-minute one-on-one time with their favorite artists. And there's so many different types of use cases that I think we're trying to illustrate what the potential for these NFT use cases really is, and sort of expand the horizon, expand the story of what is actually possible to be minted as an NFT. And so we want to create the ecosystem that allows users, creators, artists, and even brands to really come in a very safe and secure place to really explore all of these NFT use cases. And so I think this is sort of not something that a lot of other NFT marketplaces are currently talking about. And we're really excited to sort of drive the discussion into really expanding sort of what other types of NFT content and engagement tactics we can actually use to deploy on existing communities. So I think that's something that's very, very interesting for us.
Yeah, you tap on a really interesting theme in this space as well, which I've been exploring a bit around diversity and inclusion. And I think what's cool that's coming out of this space is that we can actually create this, this better world in the metaverse where we actually celebrate diversity, and we can have so many different types. I can see Yat almost on the edge of his seat, like, I know this is my thing. But it is cool. And I think Troubadour and Metacoven are really passionate about this too, in terms of how do we include more people in virtual worlds moving forward and celebrate all these different kinds of tastes. Because I mean, really, that's what makes the world amazing, isn't it? We don't want to be like walking around, wearing all the same clothes and eating all the same foods and doing the same things. We want to be able to, kind of find our personal niche and have access to that. Yet I think you talk a bit about how the internet has opened up opportunities like that. Like even with platforms like Kickstarter, for example, have allowed, little niche projects to get off the ground that never would have otherwise seen the light of day. But, where do you think NFTs takes this in terms of going to the next level?
Well, I think a few things that come to mind. One big thing is that NFTs in a digital context now take what used to be rental sort of economics into ownership economics. And that's one of the reasons that make these NFT ecosystems, like physical ecosystems, sustainable, because you don't need a big community, right? What Nick was talking about here. Yes, brands are communities, but you know what? Small communities of thousands of people is just good enough for the value that's captured in that community. And they can come together, which means you can celebrate what's interesting in that community. And I think, I'm reminded a little bit of sort of, and I'm a little older. I think I'm possibly one of the oldest guys in this group here. So I'll date myself. But, I used to listen to radio in the 80s, right? And radio was actually a diverse melting pot because we had all these different channels. And you would tune into different radio channels to listen to different kind of music all over the world, right? Or even just, where I was back then growing up in Europe. And you just, there's one guy playing this music, and you had all these one-hit wonders that would come up, people that just had one great song and then they disappear. But, it was fine, it was fun. We had lots of diverse options that we could experience. And now because of the way that the platforms operate, we're being streamlined into accepting mass taste because it's not how you can monetize it. But one of the problems is it's not necessarily just the platform's fault. I mean, yes, they're guiding you. It's because the economics are rental. So they can only monetize you in sort of microsense way. So in order to make money, you got to listen to the song or you got to consume this content 10 million times. And that number just keeps going up because it's all inflationary. With NFTs, that's different now, right? Because you can now preserve the actual scarcity in each object. And not because we manufacture scarcity, because we can create scarcity on top of the experiences, just like we have with real objects. Like in the gaming world, a virtual sword that I used with my children, or I had 100 kills with it, or I had these great achievements, they matter, right? And the other context is that with NFTs, you can now build an actual social connection with the owners of those NFTs. Sort of a small little plug here, but today, one of our groups, Limpo, launched the LMT token on Binance Smart Chain, actually, with Pancake Syrup. And it's live right now. It's the LMT token, and it's a great experience here to sort of see how that community came together. And the athletes that are launching their NFTs, which then possibly will be sold on Refinable and sort of traded and marketed there as well, for instance, they're going to be, the athletes themselves can now have a direct connection and a revenue share every time it's being resold, in the market. And the owners of them actually become this micro social network with the athlete themselves. And this is actually where things can become really exciting. I think the future social networks are the ones who are going to build tools on top of these connections to say, here's how I create a relationship. Here's how I know who's my super fan. Here's how I know who really cares about me. Right now, I only know, macro numbers. I only know, okay, I have 1 million people who follow me, or I have 1 million people who listen to my song. I don't know how much they really like my song, if they listen to me once or 10,000 times. That information belongs to the platform, and the platform mines it and makes money from it, and you get nothing for it.
Yeah, that's when you start talking about putting all of these different opportunities together, from where social engagement meets royalties, all these different moving parts is pretty exciting. And also that idea around our data being, one of the most valuable things in the world. I think people are starting to think about that. Cambridge Analytica, that scandal obviously got people starting to think a little bit about, well, who owns my data? But I kind of feel we're not there yet. And when we unlock that idea that people actually generate, create, and could own their own data, and that's valuable, that's going to be really exciting for NFTs. I just want to share with you, we've got a really interesting question from the audience. Donald Johnson is asking, can NFTs potentially impact global GDP and economies in a positive way? Now, I really love that question because, this is coming back to that idea around, well, what is of value in the metaverse, in virtual worlds? But also, I'm starting to think too, well, this is a cross-border technology by nature. So how do we can start even reimagining the idea of national GDP? I mean, I'm going down a tangent there, but would someone like to comment on that? I think that's a really cool question. Thanks, Donald.
Well, maybe I'll take a quick stab at that. Outside of course, what we've seen with Axie Infinity in the Philippines, or with F1 Delta Time and people playing games, people are making virtual incomes, and especially during COVID, in some places it's been sort of a godsend. And we're not talking about just in some cases hundreds of dollars, which is great already, but in some cases like tens of thousands of dollars where people can be earning. So it's significant. But I think the macro picture is the unlocking of the value that the platforms have observed, right? And therefore created like in a kingdom-like fashion. So we should look at the platforms, like the Facebooks out there, or the gaming studios out there, as sort of little kingdoms, or actually very large kingdoms that have a lot of economic value locked in them and have not released. And actually, therefore, a lot of the economic substance is lost and you just have to look at their profits, as a corporation, because many of them are public, and you can see all the cash flow they're generating. And that's not going through sort of effectively the digital citizens. And because the digital citizens that are playing in their worlds are effectively digital serfs who own nothing. Right? And what we've seen in history is that what happens when you take a kingdom and you turn them from a feudal society to one that's actually more capitalist democratic. It's not a case where the value increases 10 or 20% or something. It's this, it's where we are today. It's why the economies today are worth, thousands of times that what they were 500, 600 years ago, and sort of far outpaced the size of population that's gone there, because we have free trade, we have real economics, we have true ownership, we have property rights, and that's basically what I think is going to happen. We're going to talk about, multi-trillion-dollar sort of market growth, and yes, maybe the platforms might lose a little, right? But the overall ecosystem becomes so much bigger. And maybe just to close on this particular point, NFTs are that representation of property rights, which really is data ownership, but we have difficulty understanding what data ownership and rights of data means. But an NFT is not that hard to understand in terms of, well, it's an object. I mean, it's digital, but it's still an object. It means something to me. And that actually is where I think we're beginning in that first translation of what it actually means to have ownership of your data.
How do you tackle that one, Nick? You know, around that sort of interaction between value in the virtual world and real worlds, you know, how people are making sense of that, how one impacts the other. How do you tackle that sort of question?
Yeah, so I think at Refinable, we do take a slightly different thesis in terms of how we engage with NFTs. So, we do think NFTs are a digital medium, and digitally native assets such as gaming items or digital files such as JPEGs or videos, these things meld really well together. But I do think there is going to be a huge potential in terms of if we're looking at the secondary resale market, for example, on Carousel, on eBay, or Craigslist. All of these items have a potential to be embedded and locked into NFTs as well. So I think if we're just reimagining exactly what NFTs are, we can kind of expand the entire definition beyond just virtual goods. But you can look at NFTs as essentially a global passport numbering system for any asset in the world. We're talking about virtual assets. We're talking about physical assets. And for me, I used to work in the startup space. I guess I still am in the startup space. And so for us, buying digital assets, for example, like a digital design icon set or just stock photos, there's no secondary market that exists for these things. And so with NFTs, you technically have this sort of narrative where you can actually develop secondary markets for any asset in the world. I think that just gives a level of security, a level of verification and authenticity to everything in the world. So I think for one comparison, the secondary market is a really interesting place to look at. But if we're just talking about virtual economy, I think hit it on the point where essentially that's going to be a huge new market that's going to come up, right? So I think it's really about thinking how NFTs are going to reimagine or redefine sort of what we do on a day-to-day basis, as well as creating these new economies in the virtual world. And it's sort of, when you talk about the metaverse, I think a lot of people think about the metaverse in terms of different universes in the virtual world, but I'm thinking it's the virtual world mixed in with the physical world. And I think NFTs is just going to be one layer that ties a lot of these things together. So that's why I'm super excited. I think that's sort of the thesis we adopt at Refinable. And so we want to be content and community agnostic. And so that's sort of the future that we're looking to build out.
Wow, that it was. I'm tripping over my words because I'm just thinking it really is so exciting to think about where this is going. I've even heard people talking about things like, holograms and AR that can interact with our real world. And it's amazing to start thinking, where already I think the lines between real and virtual worlds are blurring, but in terms of where this is going to go, there's just so much potential. How do you think about that, Gleb? Where do you see that happening in terms of that interaction between worlds and what the sort of value could be in terms of, an economic potential?
So, in terms of metaverses, so I think that, of course, there is a great potential. But of course, I think first of all we should expect AR glasses because such type of of tools can really help of AR adoption. But of course, right now it's only the beginning. So I think that there is very, very big potential in terms of AR and VR. Overall, if we talk about the previous question was about global GDP and economies. So whether NFTs will impact in a positive way. So living in a developing country, I can say that, of course, young artists, creators, some designers, projects with NFTs, they have access to to the whole world, because previously, if you're a young artist, you didn't have access, to global market. You could only, sell your, pictures or art in Russia, and especially it's complicated within the COVID times. But yeah, right now, NFTs, there are no borders, with NFTs. So anyone, any talent can, can issue NFT and start selling it to any person around the globe. So yeah, that's why I'm really bullish on NFTs.
So I'll play devil's advocate, because, I think a criticism recently is, and you just touched on this, Gleb, that one of the amazing things about NFTs is that anyone can create one. And I think some people are saying that, oh, well, because anyone can flood the market with NFTs, then that must bring down the overall value of the market if we're looking at it from a holistic perspective. And I was wondering to know what you think about that. Obviously I'm coming at this from the angle of the criticisms that people have brought up. Some people have said there's a lot of speculative waste out there. What would you say to people who are wondering, okay, I want to buy something of value. What sort of things should they be assessing when they actually go to make their decision? And is it all completely logical? Does it just come down to a price tag, or is it a bit more emotional like we were discussing before? Do you want to take that one first, Gleb? How would you tackle that one?
So I'm thinking of NFTs as, internet. So for example, there are a lot of different websites in the internet, but not all their websites are really, important and relevant for the audience. So that's why I think that, most of NFTs won't have any value, but, that's okay. And, nothing to worry about that. I think people will really, appreciate, those NFTs that has value. And again, as it was mentioned before, you can have some small community, and your NFT can have value just for this community. And again, that's great. But overall, if you want to buy some NFTs, so of course you should be cautious, and you shouldn't buy just to earn money, because earning money, it's more about speculation. You should buy NFT if you really like it, or if it's, for example, it's a gaming asset and you really like, playing this game. So that's why it will have, some value for you.
I think that's a really beautiful way to think about it too. If the price did crash, would you still really love that thing and want to hold on to it? And, does the price even matter in some circumstances? What would you say about that, Nick?
Yeah, so I always want to tell people that it's not NFT that is the price, it is the thing on the NFT. So I really want to make a clear separation that just because it's NFT doesn't mean it's worth X amount of dollars, it's the content that's on it. Metacoven bought the Beeple artwork. The Beeple artwork is, but the NFT is more just like a medium of transaction, right? It is a wrapping paper. It is a box packaging these things, but what's inside the box is what's most valuable. So there's no way I could ever tell someone how to value certain things. I think even with the price of Bitcoin for the last, since 2009, people have been arguing how much a Bitcoin is worth. There are literally, there's a whole industry of venture capitalists trying to find ways of valuing different companies as well. So the entire conversation about how we value items is out of this world, right? And so I always tell my team and the community that, there is going to be, I guess, a readjustment and sort of the NFT market prices. But I do think it's going to adjust to a way where a lot of the prices are more sensible in terms of how people are pricing things. I think right now there's a lot of marketing stunts that are kind of happening with these crazy prices. It's driving a lot of attention. I think attention is great because people are really learning about NFTs, and that's an on-ramp to a lot of blockchain subject matters. So for example, we think the macro factors right now are really in play, that people have a lot of time, they have a lot of capital, they have a lot of interest in NFTs, and this is a great on-ramp for people to learn about blockchain, what it really stands for, what is the value of money, what they can do, and decentralization. So I do think a lot of factors right now are great for introducing people to these concepts about decentralized finance as well. And yeah, so it's such an interesting time for us to be here. And I don't think I can ever tell someone how to value something. It's really up to them, right?
Nick, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I really liked what you said about, a box or a wrapping paper for a piece of value. I mean, that kind of concept is not really that out there when we think about the fact that obviously things are going digital now, but people value pieces of plastic and paper as though they're worth $20. A $20 note doesn't actually have any value. It's just that we have decided to value it in that way and agreed that it has that value, and then we can exchange it. But if we all decided tomorrow that those pieces of fiat are no longer valued, then we have a huge problem. But also, you know, to come back to that idea too around like radical inclusion and the ability for anyone to create an NFT and anyone to participate in that market. Yat, maybe you could give us the closing word on that. You know, how important is that, and how will it actually impact the market from a value perspective, you know, the way you look at it?
All wonderful discussions. I think one of the classic things here is that, you know, many people come at crypto looking at everything as a store of value. What's the value? What's the value? How much is it worth, right? But I go back to the earlier point. NFTs are a store of culture, and culture has value, but it doesn't have to necessarily mean a specific dollar value in the fungible sense. You know, when people are sort of, you know, I'm reminded of this concept of, you know, wine is a great example, because wine is culture. It's about the history, the provenance, the drink, the social, you know, all of that. But it's also become a quasi-speculative value, because some people go in and they say, you know, this Chateaubriand is very valuable or whatever. And I'm not much of a wine drinker, but I hang around with friends and I recognize that wine has a value, right? And some people think it's very valuable. But all of my wine friends say the same thing. You know, if it's not worth anything, I can still enjoy the drink. And I think that's how we should look at NFTs as well. I mean, it's a utility. Can be used in a game? Can it be used in a virtual world, in a metaverse? You know, what does it represent about you? What are you showing or demonstrating or showcasing when you have that ownership of that NFT, whether it's a badge or an achievement? I mean, that is what this is, right? And, you know, one of the things that I love about NFTs is that, typically speaking, when you buy an NFT, you can't expect to sell it very quickly normally, right? It's like buying a car, you know, or buying an artwork. You don't buy an artwork to sell tomorrow, normally, right? You buy an art to enjoy it, to show it, to display it. Maybe you can sell it, right? And I think that's the longevity. That's what culture is about. You know, like Leb was saying, you know, you're building websites to demonstrate something, to showcase something, but you're not building the website to sort of sell the website tomorrow. Although we had people trade domain names and that kind of stuff too. So you need them, but they don't comprise 99% of what happens out there in the world. We just have an oversized version of that with crypto because of how it started, but that's not how the world works.
Yeah, some fantastic analogies and use cases there too to help people understand the importance of technology. So I just want to thank you all so much for sharing that. I think what I take away is that this is a huge, huge market that we're talking about. I think in cryptocurrencies, there's definitely a big market of people who are trading for that financial value. But when we start talking about items that we have emotional connections to and this real sort of human connection with these things, I actually think it's a much, much bigger market. So it'll be exciting to see where it goes. Thank you, everyone, for such a good conversation. And I'd love to throw back to our hosts. Thanks for having us.
Wow, what an amazing panel discussion. So unfortunately, we've come to that part of the evening where we've got to say goodbye. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers. But fear not, because we will be back next week, Tuesday, for NFT for Artists, the Beginner's Guide. It's going to be an absolutely amazing session that you do not want to miss. So we actually saw, staying on topic, that many of you mentioned in the comments Binance's spectacular announcement today. And yes, that is true. Binance will be launching their own NFT marketplace to make NFTs more accessible for creators, for users, and of course, all of our fellow Binanceans. So we don't have any spoilers for you today, but for now, register for next week using the QR code currently on screen, and you never know what you might find out. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you here next week.